All right, let me get my screen shared here and get this turned on for you guys here too. You can see as well. Yeah. All right, let's make sure this is working. Let's see. So question is, do you guys want lights on or off?
Probably off. Yeah.
Is that better?
My glasses on.
Okay. So here's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna go through, we're gonna talk about this buyer broker and talk about mostly what today really is about is helping you understand how to fill it out, those type of things. So so as we go through this, we'll talk about that. And essentially the other piece that I'm gonna do with you guys as we go through this is I'm gonna really walk you through from the standpoint of just like, how do I explain it to a client when I'm taking them through it? What are the things that I say to them to help them understand and know what they're signing, those type of things. So typically, here's how I will approach it to begin with. Is the first thing typically that I will say to a buyer, since that's what we're talking about right now, but I do this with the sellers as well, is the first thing I'll typically say to them is, okay, we have three choices basically on filling out this form. We can either have you just read the whole thing if you want to, or I can go through and explain to you what it says, or you can just sign it. And which of those three do you think they usually choose?
It depends on the personality type.
Well, to some extent, that's true, personality type, but as a general rule, what I have found is most people will say, just tell me what I'm signing, is usually what happens. And for me personally, a lot of times with stuff like this, like for example, buying a car or something, when they go in and go, do you want me to tell you everything? I'm like, well, I assume if I don't sign it as it is, you're not going to sell me the car, right? And they usually, yeah, okay, well then I don't really care. Like, maybe I should, and maybe it'll come back to bite me someday. But anyway, all right, so we're going to go through and talk about this. Now, the first thing that I want to point out to you guys though is notice right up here that it has right under where it says exclusive buyer broker agreement. This is a legally binding agreement. Read carefully before signing designated agency. So just kind of as a way of making sure that you guys are aware and you understand, this is a legally binding agreement. Now, the thing with it is though, is that it's pretty rare that we do go and legally enforce this contract. And I would say it's pretty rare that brokerages in general go and enforce this contract. So that doesn't change the fact though that it is a legally binding agreement. So even though it's a legally binding agreement and most of the time we don't do anything about it, meaning if a client were to go sign this and then go buy from somebody else, it's pretty rare that we're going to go after them to try to get the commission.
But catch them before they buy, right?
To some extent, that's going to be the best way. Now, let me though say this though. This is a legally binding agreement. The reason I bring this up and talk about it is because I want you to know, as a brokerage, we're going to support you in what you want to do. Meaning, if you had a client that signed one of these and then they went and bought a house from somebody else and you wanted to go after them for the commission, we will support you on that. Now, let me help you make your decision though, of if you're going to do that or not. And here's why it typically doesn't happen. Is a lot of times what'll happen is, well, let me back up. You are independent contractors, right? Meaning you're not employees. We aren't telling you you have to show up at a certain time, leave at a certain time, put in so many hours and whatever. But because you're an independent contractor, there's negatives that go with that as well. And this is one of the negatives that goes with you being an independent contractor. If you had a client that goes and buys a property that has signed this and you say, I want to go after them, I want the commission, I want to get paid, we'll support you on that. Now, the way that looks like though is this. typically what's going to happen is we would have our attorney send a letter, like a demand letter, basically, to the client saying that they owe us a commission. But if you want to pursue it further than that, then we will do that and we'll support you in it. But the way the attorney's fees get paid is based upon your split. So for example, let's say that you're on a 70% split. You get to pay 70% of the attorney's fees as well, because when we collect the commission, who's getting 70% of the commission? You are. So as a result, you get to pay 70% of the attorney's fees. So this is one of those scenarios where you would wish you were on a 50-50 split. So in fact, maybe that's the way to do it, is if you're going to go in after it, come to the company and say, hey, I want to change my split. I want to be on a 30% to me, 70% to you guys. And then let's go after this commission and let the company pay 70%. And obviously I'm joking on that, but that is the way that it works. So, and typically my experience is that's the way it works at every company. And so as a result of that, especially in more so in today's world where agents have higher and higher splits, typically we say to the agent, that's great. If you want to spend the money to go after the commission, we'll support you, but you get to pay 70% of the attorney's fees, meaning that if in the event it's not collected, you spent 70% of the attorney's fees. So think of it that way, it's a good news, bad news of having a high split. If you decide you want to go after it, you get to foot the 70% or whatever your commission split is of the attorney's fees. Okay. So that's typically why a lot of times these don't get enforced that way. Now, with that being said, though, let me switch over to, there is another piece of this though, where at the board, we have a code of ethics that says that we won't interfere with somebody's agency and that type of a thing. So in the event that somebody did go and buy with somebody else, you could still try to go after it from the standpoint of a procuring cause with the board to say that you're entitled to the commission. And that, again, we would support you. And I see that happen actually more so than somebody trying to go to court to collect the attorneys or the commission.
It's just first going after the client versus kind of going after the agent, sort of.
Yeah.
So like going after the agent, but like.
Yeah, it's not really going after, but it's saying, hey, I'm entitled to the commission. I should have been the one that got this commission on there. So anyway, all right. Now that we've got that out of the way, this legally binding agreement, just keep that in mind, all of how that all works. All right, so now let's jump into this. The exclusive buyer broker agreement entered into on, let me see if I can hide the sidebar here. There we go. Make it a little bigger. Able to see. Okay. So the first thing we're going to put in here is that is this effective date. So it's entered in effective on the blank day of month of year, which obviously you're just going to put the date that you want it to become effective, which is typically the day that you're meeting with them to fill that in. The next piece down, the next line says that it's between Century 21 Everest and blank, the buyer. Now, where am I going to get, how do I know what to put in there for the buyer's name?
Your full name on their license.
Okay, so Aiden's saying the full name on the license. Any other thoughts?
Also, probably the person on title, which should be the person matching the license that you.
Okay, so but at this point, they're not on title because they're signing the buyer broker agreement.
Or yeah, sorry. Like for, because eventually it's right. So
you're on the right track though. So what would it be if it's not the title? If they haven't bought yet? I'll help you. And you'll go, oh yeah. However they applied for the loan, which is however they apply for the loan is how they will be on title. So here's what I recommend. When you're filling this out, when you get to this line for the buyer, what I usually recommend, if you don't already know, then you should ask, have you already applied for a loan? If the answer is yes, hopefully they can have a pre-approval letter they can hand to you. But if they don't, then you want to get a pre-approval letter, obviously. But I just ask them, what is the name you use to apply for the loan and who will all be on title? Because that's what we want to have on the form here, is how they're applying for the loan. Now, here's the truth. For the buyer broker, probably not as crucial that it matches how they're applying for the loan. But since most of us are either using .loop or a DocuSign, some type of that to get signatures, you want it to match so that, because on the REPC, the lender is going to want the purchase contract to match how they're applying for the loan. So we want to make sure that it's going to match that way. So that's typically what I recommend, is when you get to here, finding out who are the decision makers, who's going to be on title, how did they apply for the loan, what's name did they use, and that's what you want to put on there for that. All right, next. So as I go through this, like I said, we're not going to read through everything, but I'm mostly going to go through how do you explain it, how do you fill out the form, and then as you guys have questions, we'll stop and talk about it, okay? So the terms of the agreement. So the buyer is retaining the company, including blank, which is going to be obviously you as the buyer's agent. You're going to put that in there as the authorized agent for the company, and that it's effective and ending at 5 p.m. on blank day of month of year. How far out should we put this? 6 months, okay? Any other thoughts?
I don't want to do a year.
A year, okay? Anyone else? Zoom, anyone? Okay, so there's not a right answer. At the end of the day, there's not a right answer to this. Here's how I usually do it. When I get to this section, if I don't already know, I'm going to ask them how long are they thinking till they need to be into a property? When do they want to purchase? And if they say, oh, well, something in the next month or two, then I'm probably going to put the expiration of this contract to be 3 or 4 months out. If they said something in the next 3 or 4 months, then I probably would do 6 months. If they're saying, you know, I don't know, in the next year sometime, but here's the key thing. By me asking them, you know, hey, this agreement's going to be good, you know, as long as until you purchase a property, basically. And so when are you planning on to get into a property? If they tell me, I don't know, sometime in the next year, what are they also telling me?
Not serious.
Yeah, they're not very motivated to get into a property versus somebody who says, yeah, something in the next month, maybe 2 at the most. They're telling me they need to get into a property. So part of I will use this when I get to there as a way of figuring out motivation if I don't already know what it is, okay? So there's not a right answer. The reason it's a blank line versus just saying 6 months from the date of execution is because you might want to do it a year, you might want to do it less. For me, I typically just find out when are they going to be buying, planning to move in, and then I may put it 1 month after that just in case we have a delay or something along the way, okay? So that's how I'm going to do that. And then that it is.
Russ, you asked how quickly, how do you word that again?
So I just say, so when are you wanting to be moved into a property? And then if they said, I don't know, in the next few months, you know, next year, I don't know, we'll see. But so yeah, just how quickly are you wanting to be moved into the property? And I just tell them that's going to determine how long we're going to put the contract for. Okay. All right. Now, let me actually say this though, too, because some agents are afraid of this. And when I say some, less so at our company, and I think we do a pretty good job of getting people to sign it. But outside of our company, and really, if we just included agents across the country, so not even just in Utah, but if we went across the country, very, very few, in fact, I would say it is around 2% would be my guess, of the agents ever get this signed before writing an offer. Very, very few outside of our company do that. So we do a good job of training it, and we do it for our protection, your protection, meaning so you know you're getting paid. But occasionally you're going to come across somebody who doesn't want to sign this agreement, that they're hesitant to sign it for 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever. So for me, before I go out and show properties to them though, I want to get this signed, even if I had to say to the person, if they were hesitant because they had a bad experience, I'm going to say, well, then let's just sign it to be effective for the next 2 weeks or maybe a month even, I might say. But for me personally, I want them to sign it because if they're not going to sign it, if they're hesitant to sign it, they don't want to sign it. What are they also telling you?
Not motivated.
Well, they might still be motivated.
They don't want to be obligated.
They're just not committed to you at this point. See, so for me, in fact, again, just on a Facebook group that the Wasatch Front Realtors one, whatever, I don't remember what it's called, but
See all this shit talking,
yeah. But I saw somebody yesterday, or within the last few days, I don't remember what day it was. I saw somebody had posted that they had a listing. They got a call from a buyer, wanted to go see the property. The listing agent asked them, are you working with an agent? Do you have somebody that would be representing you? They said no. They went out and showed them the property, and then they got a call saying, hey, my agent's gonna be sending you over an offer. And so they were frustrated. So here's to me, my point with that. When somebody's not willing to sign this, there's probably a reason they're not willing to sign it. And is it possible that the reason is they had a bad experience? Absolutely. But I would say it's also could be their agent is at work at their other job, and so they couldn't go show them the property, or they're out of town or whatever. And so they go see the property, and then they're gonna write it with somebody else. For me, I wanna know for me, even as a worst case scenario, which we'll get to here in just a second on the property located at a worst case scenario, I am not gonna show the property to them unless they'll sign it at least for that property. So, because again, I wanna know that in the event that they're gonna write an offer on the property, that they're gonna use me for it. And so one of the things I recommend doing as you're showing properties or setting appointments to do that is to be saying to them, hey, in the event that we go look at this house, I know you're not planning on buying today, but in the event we got there and you decided you wanted to write an offer, would you have me be the one writing the offer for you? And if they say yes, I'm gonna say, great, then I'm gonna have a document that I need you to sign when we get there that says that. And if they're hesitant over the phone to do that, I want to probe a little more to find out why. So did you have a question or comment?
I did.
You lost it. I didn't go to you fast enough. All right. Well, when it comes back, let me know. All right. So the next piece of this is that it's going to last until that date or the closing of the acquisition of a property, whichever occurs first. Okay.
I remembered it.
Okay, go ahead.
So say you do that, you're like, hey, I just want you to sign this like for 1 month. If you change your mind, that's fine. But they're for the specific property. They sign that, and then like 3 weeks goes by, and they're getting really serious, and you have another one signed, but it's not like expired. The first one's not expired. Does the new one just supersede
Yes.
that one?
Yes.
Totally. Is there like verbiage somewhere in here that says that, or is that just like a standard?
No, I think,
the
yeah.
board will
Yeah,
realize
that would just be something that's just because it's you, it's fine. If it was somebody else, then it would be an issue.
What if you changed like the commission or something a little bit?
That's okay.
And they go, oh, the first one said this, and you say, oh, this is the most recent one.
Yeah, that's what I would say is that, and I don't know that it does. I'll have to pay attention as we go through here. I don't know that there is anywhere that it says that if they were to sign something else that would supersede.
Yeah.
But I think just to me,
The board says-
reasonable person would assume the fact that you signed a new one. Yeah. Okay, so the next piece of it is then that it's gonna be any properties that are either A, located in blank county, so you can put in the counties that you're gonna be showing them, or B, located at and put in a specific address, okay? Now, a lot of agents will just put in all Utah counties or something like that in here. But we had a scenario that there was an agent here at this office, picked up a buyer, I think it was an internet lead, if I remember right, picked up a potential buyer, asked them if they had signed a buyer broker with somebody else. The person said yes. And they said, well, then and as long as you're subject to that agreement, I can't really show you properties. And they said, well, we only signed it for Salt Lake County with that person. And the agent came to me and said, well, so would that mean if they wanted to buy in a different county, they could use me? What do you think the answer is?
Technically this.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're only obligated for Salt Lake County. And I said, but here's the thing for me is, do they hate the agent that much that they're gonna go buy in a different county just to not have to have that person paid a commission? And he went and talked to the client, and the client said, yes, we do. We hate the agent that bad that we're gonna only look in Utah County to find a property, so to avoid the agent. Okay, great. So he actually even called the buyer's agent who had signed one for Salt Lake County and said, these people have called me. I understand they're subject to your agreement in Salt Lake County. but they're gonna use me if they buy in Utah County, and I just wanted to make sure that your contract really did only say Salt Lake County. And she said, yep, it only said Salt Lake County. He said, okay. And so he started showing them properties. Well, as you would guess, they didn't really want to be in Utah County. And so as they started looking, they then came back to him going, well, what if we did want to buy in Salt Lake County? So now what do you do?
If I want to Draper right on the line.
Yeah, get it in Draper, the
Yeah.
Utah County part of Draper, right? No. So what he did is he just called up the agent and said, look, they don't want to use you. They, can we work something out? And so they did. They worked out something to where he still would be the agent. And I think he paid her a referral fee or something. So anyway, that's section 1, the terms of the agreement. So typically I would just say, for me, I would say I want them to be all Utah counties, all counties in Utah or something, to that effect. So that you're kind of tying them to you. But at the end of the day, for me, here's the hard part. And this is just personal to me. If I have somebody that doesn't want to work with me, I'm not going to typically, now, depending, there have been scenarios where maybe somebody does something sneaky that I'd be like, no, you owe me a commission. But as a general rule, if you don't want to work with me, I'm fine. I'm not going to hold them to something as long as they're, not being sneaky. But anyway, all right.
Second type thing.
What?
Like last second type thing, like you're about to close, and they're like, actually. you wanna go
Yeah,
somewhere?"
actually,
Like,
we want to
"No."
write it with our friends.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that probably is not going to work. But if it was a scenario of hey, we're trying to call you, and every time we call you, you're gone on vacation and you can't go show us a property or whatever, then I'm gonna be workable. So, all right, section 2, brokerage fee. So on this one, we have now, this is a new form. And in fact, I think the one I emailed out to most of you had the wrong form, and I updated it afterwards. But this is the one that's in .loop. But you'll notice here that says, if during the initial term or any extension of the term, the buyer or any other person acting on their behalf acquires an interest in a property, the buyer will pay the company a brokerage fee in the amount of, and then it has a blank line or a dollar amount you can put in, a percentage or a dollar amount. So for me, I actually don't like the fact that we updated this form and put a blank line, because the old one just said 3%. And for me, I like the idea of it saying 3%. But I haven't asked to find out why we changed it. My assumption is because you're seeing properties at 2, 2.5. And so again, I go back to, for me, if we're filling this out and getting it signed when I feel like we should, which is before writing an offer on a property, we don't know what the commission's going to be. And so therefore, I think we should be putting in 3%. I think I would have been fine if we changed it because, hey, some people are charging 4%. Then I'd be like, great, we should change it to be a blank line. But this almost encourages, in my mind, you guys, agents, to take less than a 3% and to write in there 2 or 2.5 or something. And I don't like it. So I don't like where we're headed. But
This is for.
now that I'll get off my soapbox.
Transaction fee, like 3% plus $5.95 for a transaction fee. That's all.
Well, yeah, sorry. Yeah, you could do it that way. But the old one said 3%. So I guess to me, I'd be fine even if we had the blank line for the acquisition fee, but I feel like it still ought to say 3%.
What if the BAC is 4%, but yours is 3%? You still get the 4? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because then what happens? So yeah, let me actually just read on what it says here. It says, if the property acquired by the buyer is listed by a brokerage, with a brokerage, the buyer agent commission, the BAC on the MLS, paid to the company by the listing brokerage shall satisfy the buyer's obligation for the brokerage fee shown above, provided that the BAC is not less than the amount shown above. So if it's more, that's fine. But essentially, so what this is saying, this section here, is whatever amount you put in there, which I'm going to tell you to put in 3%, and then whatever acquisition fee you want to do, but minimum you need to put in $295. What? I shouldn't say that. You could leave 0. It's just you'll have to pay the $295. But so you should do a minimum $295. Whatever it is offered on the MLS is going to be credited towards that provided it's not less than whatever the amount is you put in there. So for me personally, 3% plus, 595 or something like that you're gonna put in there. Then when you go out and find the property, if it ends up being less. So here's the key. And maybe this may be the reason that the company's changed it to a blank line, we're more likely to address it if it's a blank line. And here's what I think you need to do. When you get to this section and you're filling it out with a buyer, what you want to ask the buyer is, and explain to the buyer is, everybody out there is offering a different amount. Our company, this is how I blame it on the company. Hey, our company requires 3%. So when we see a property that's offering 2 or 2.5%, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, how do you want me to handle it? What do you want to do? Because for years and years and years, it was so rare to see anything less than 3% that it just said 3% there. And I would typically, when I was explaining this to a client, would just say, it says 3%, but you're not going to have to pay me anything ever because the other side is going to pay it. We'll credit it. So really it says 3%, but you're not paying me anything. In today's world, though, we can't really do that anymore. So you kind of have to have this conversation now with your buyer of saying, how do you want to handle it? What do you want me to do if we come across one? Because again, without saying any names of any brokerages, but they have a lot of billboards around and seem like they might be a gangster more than a real estate company. Oh wait, maybe that's too many hands. They're green. How's that? I've seen where they'll offer $1. The buyer's agent gets $1. Well, here's the question. Are you gonna go do the transaction for $1? Because I'm not.
Does your buyer want to pay you X amount of 3%?
Well, see, that's the challenge. That is the problem that we have put ourselves into as a profession because of what we're doing with commissions, is we're putting ourselves now into this position of it could be anything. So that's why it's become so crucial now for you to talk to your client to be saying, okay, how do you want to handle it? Because if we come across one, and I would even just tell them, there are some people out there that are going to say they'll pay $1. I'm not doing this job for $1. Sorry. So how do you want to handle it when we come across it? Now, I usually will tell them also that I can probably negotiate a commission. And so give me that chance first. But the main thing I want them to know is if they see a property online and they call me and want to see it, or I'm sending them one and they want to go see it, before we go see it, I'm going to let them know what it means in terms of the commission and let them make a decision of how they want to handle it. And the good news is most of the time, now the market we have been in for the last 6 months, which I feel like it's changing a bit, but the market we've been in for the last 6 months and maybe 8 months has been, you're kind of toast. Like the buyer would have to just pay you. Typically though, you could go back to the seller and just say, hey, I've got a buyer that's interested, but they're not going to do it based on the commission that you're offering. So let me give you a quick story where I did that actually. This was a townhouse out in, I think it was Riverton, if I remember, but out in Riverton area, might have been Harriman, but Riverton, Harriman. And this was a friend of mine's son that I was showing properties to. We pulled up. And for me, like I said, it was so common for so long to be just 3%. I even still today don't remember. I need to check to see what they're offering. But back then it was still pretty rare. And so I remember I was out showing them the property. And then once they decided once I could see that they were kind of liking this townhome, I was like, oh, all right. I think they're going to want to write an offer on this. So I'm holding the MLS in my hand. I look down at the printout and it says 2.5. And I'm like, oh. So they start saying, yeah, we think we really like it. We get done showing the property. They say, well, let us go home and think about it. And then we'll let you know. Now, if the agent had offered 3 or more, I probably would have at that point said, because I'll use this a lot of times with a buyer. Hey, here's the good news. You're going to have longer than that to think about it. Meaning during the due diligence period, they can cancel for any reason. So you got all that time to think about it. You don't have to decide tonight if you want it, but in order to make sure we don't end up in a multiple offer or competing with other people or lose the property altogether, we should write an offer. That's typically how I would handle it. But because I saw that it was only 2.5, I was like, yeah, go ahead and think about it. Because I'm hoping they don't want to buy it, so I don't have to deal with it. I leave, go back home, they go to wherever they go to think about it. And I get a phone call from the listing agent. Hey, I just wanted to get some feedback on your showing. I said, actually, they really like the property and they have some interest in the property. However, they have signed a buyer broker with me that says they'll pay me 3%. You're only offering 2.5. They can't afford to bring in the other half. Now, here's the truth. I was never going to make them bring in the other half, but I said, they can't afford to bring in the other 0.5%. So they're probably not going to write an offer on it because of that. And the agent said to me, you can't do that. You have a fiduciary duty to your client. So is he correct?
You go, yeah, you're darn right. And I had that conversation with them and they can't do it.
Okay, well, I had not had that conversation with them
Yeah, you're already lying.
though. I what?
You're already lying. You told them they couldn't afford it.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
But I was playing poker.
Anyway.
But so here's the thing though. Have I done at that point, had I done anything against my fiduciary duties? No. Because the fiduciary duty, if I would have said I'm not showing you the property because they're only offering 2.5, that would be a violation of a fiduciary duty. But I showed them the property. Did they ask me to write an offer? No. So I didn't do anything wrong with any fiduciary. If they had asked me to write an offer, then maybe I would have, if I said no, would be against the fiduciary duties. But at that point they hadn't. So I just said, hey, they're probably not going to write an offer because they don't want to have to pay me the other 0.5%. And so what do you want to do? And he just went off. And I just said, well, I'll let you know if they change their mind, if they can work it out somehow, but otherwise, and I hung up. What I wish I had done now, but I didn't at the time, was I wish I had said to him, well, let me ask you this question. Did you tell your seller by offering only 2.5 that it was going to reduce the number of people that would be interested in writing offers? Because that would be a violation of your fiduciary duty. Like to some extent, I almost feel like so here's my point. If you're going to offer less than a 3%, I think you should have that conversation with your seller. Meaning, so some of these brokerages that are offering only $1, they probably should be saying to their client, just so you know, if we offer only $1, a lot of people are not going to be interested in seeing your house, which is going to reduce the demand for your house, which reduces the price for your house. It's going to cost you money to do that. So anyway, now, again, like I said, the last 6 months, what we've been through, unfortunately, we couldn't do a lot of this stuff. But as a general rule, most of the over 25 years that I've been doing this, you could do that. It would work to call up and say, my client's interested, but your client's going to have to pony up a little bit more money on the BAC. And it's not, you got to not make it about the BAC. You got to make it about, they've signed this agreement with me that says they're going to have to pay me a 3%.
That's just more reason to have them sign this already.
That's right. That's exactly right. All the more reason to have already had it signed. Now, I think the other reason that the company has done it this way, where it's a blank line, is, which by the way, we won't spend this much time on all the sections, but I think the other reason they've done it is because if we get audited by Century 21 nationally, if they came in and audit our company and they see that the buyer has signed saying they would pay us a 3% and the transaction closes and we only got, let's say 2%, we only pay a franchise fee on the 2%, what we collected. But if they came in and audited and saw that your buyer had signed a 3%, Century 21 is saying to us, to Century 21 Everest, give us the 6% of the 1% that you guys said you were going to collect. So you owe us. So I think that's the other reason they've done this, because technically it's just kind of also so you guys know, even though you signed it at 3, if you end up taking less than that, like the buyers on the MLS is only offered 2.5 and you get 2.5, we really need to do an addendum to this saying that it's changed to 2.5, so that otherwise the company gets dinged, in which case they come to you as well, again, on your split saying you owe that. So, all right. We good on brokerage fee? Any other questions? Have I beat that one up enough? Or should we beat it up a little? Any questions on the plus the blank amount for the admin fee? Everybody's good with that?
Very specific of plus equals and, so it's 3% and that. plus
That's
that.
right.
It's not and or.
Yep, correct.
What's the addendum called if you have to switch it?
Yeah, so it's just gonna be an addendum to the buyer broker.
So it's a blanket addendum that you put in.
Yep, it's just a blank addendum. You'd go in and put brokerage fee to be 2.5% of the acquisition price or
Do
whatever.
you have to label blanket addendums and then put the sub, like, I guess the meat of the addendum? So you pull up blank addendum, go, this is addendum to exclusive buyer broker
Uh-huh.
signed this date or reference date this.
Oh, you don't need to type all that. No, you would just put in, you just get the addendum. And I think there is a spot for a number on it. We can check after, but I think there's a spot for a number on it, but that's the extent of what you'd have to do.
Would a lawyer have to put that together, as we can't be practicing law?
Technically, yeah, but you don't need to. If you just grab the blank addendum to the buyer broker and fill it out, you're good.
Safe.
Yep, you'll be safe. All right, protection period. If within blank months after the termination, so what should we put on that blank line? Basically what this is, and let me tell you how I explain it, and then you guys tell me what you think we ought to put in there. When I get to this section explaining it to a buyer, I tell them what this protection period for is to keep honest people honest. Is really, that's how I explain it to them. Is because what it says is if within however many months you guys decide we're gonna put in here, they bought a property that I showed them, that I would still be owed the commission. So what do you think we should put in there? If within how many months?
I mean, I put 6 months, but I feel like 3 months would be sufficient, because then you have to look at is how long are they okay with not selling the property after this expires? You know, so I mean, typically 3 months, but 6 months is
Okay,
pretty safe.
good. Yeah, and again, there's not a right answer. So whatever you want to put in there is fine. Here's what I will tell you though. Don't put 0. There are agents who put in their 0. And recently we had an agent who went out, showed a property, put 0 in there. This agreement expired. The person then bought the house and they were like, hey, I should be owed a commission. And when we looked at this, we're like, yeah, no, unfortunately, because you put 0 in there. So I would at least, for me, like I said, I think of it as it's just to keep honest people honest. It's to keep people from saying, hey, if I just wait a couple of days, you know, this is going to expire and I could then go buy the house and I wouldn't owe you a commission. So for me, I like the idea of 3 actually, Aiden, but I would at least put 1 is probably what I would tell you.
And so in the 0 circumstance, it's 0 months, so the set, like typically how it goes is you close the property in the next 2 days when your check is cut, or 3 days, so that's like the second it's closed, they technically don't owe you anything because it is after the like closing of that.
Well, but this
property.
one's saying if within so many months after the termination or expiration, the buyer or anybody acting on their behalf enters into an agreement to purchase or exchange. So there's a different section that's going to cover if they're already under contract.
You still could be paid commission as long as like.
Yes,
Someone else.
and I'll show you where we hit that here. I think it's in section 5 if I remember, but I'll show you. So, okay, good. So that's protection period. Okay, section 4, buyer representation and disclosure. So this section here, what this one's saying is, and we're not going to read it, but essentially what this one's saying is that the buyer is warranting to you that they haven't entered into another agreement. See, I think it's kind of a little bit like our code of ethics says you shouldn't interfere with somebody else's agency. Well, every single buyer broker that I have read, and so it's possible there's some that aren't out there that say this, but everyone that I've ever read from any company says that the buyer warrants that the buyer has not entered into any other exclusive buyer broker agreement, and that they will in communications with other agents notify them that they've signed. See, so to some extent, to me, I feel like if somebody has signed one of these, it's the buyer's responsibility. They should be calling you on the phone, or when you get them on the phone, they should be saying to you, FYI, I've signed a buyer broker with another agent. But agents don't explain that. So I'm making sure I explain it to you guys. But so that's what this section is saying, is that the buyer is warranting to us they haven't signed with anybody else. And that when they do come in contact with people, that they would tell them. And then the other thing is that they're also agreeing that they will give us any relevant information of personal or finance that they'll review the due diligence, all of that kind of stuff is what's contained in here basically, is that they're gonna hold us harmless against any claims, stuff like that, okay? And then they're gonna initial and date right there. All right, section 5. So I lied, section 5 is not the section I was talking about. We'll get to it. But section 5 is agency, and this is where it's explaining to the buyer that you're gonna be acting as their agent, looking out for their best interest. So when I get to this section, what I do is explain to them that I'm on your side. What this section says is that I'm negotiating on your behalf. We're not adversaries. We're working together on this. Anything I know, you're gonna know. And so just know we're on the same team. That's kind of how I approach it with them is we're sitting on the same side of the table. We shouldn't be feeling like that I'm trying to get you to buy a house you don't want to buy or anything like that. I'm on your side. Well, I'm here to do what you want to do. And then I explained the duties of a limited agent. Basically what that says is that if you were to go look at a listing that I was the listing agent on a home, then I would have to be limited. And I always just tell them basically what that means is I couldn't tell the seller the most you're willing to pay for the home, but I couldn't tell you the least they would be willing to accept. And so I usually just tell the buyer in that scenario, if we go to look at a house that is one that I have listed, just don't tell me the highest you would be willing to pay. And then you don't have to worry about me going and telling the seller is really all the difference is on this. Does that make sense? Okay. So I just explained to them that that's how limited agency works. Section 6 is professional advice. And I always just tell them what this section is saying is that I'm trained in the marketing of real estate. I'm not a property inspector. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a plumber. I'm not a surveyor. Like this section, and here's how I always say it to them when I'm with the buyer. I say, this section says, don't trust anything I tell you. And usually they laugh when they say that. And then I explain it like what I just said. Really what it's just saying is I'm trained in the marketing of real estate. So don't ask me questions about a property because I'm not the expert. Now, when we get to the buyer due diligence here in just a minute, I'll tell you a little bit more of how I approach that with them. But I always just say with this section, when I get there, I always do jokingly say, this says, don't trust anything I tell you about the property. Okay.
Are you allowed to like give recommendations on like, say you know a good plumber that is could work in the area, like you're allowed to refer them to
Yes.
them though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that would be totally fine. But this is just saying, just don't trust me. And the reason why this section exists, every time we're going through the contract stuff, you always have to kind of stop and go, why would we put this section in here? Why would an attorney want this in here? Well, almost every time you can count on, there was a lawsuit that took place that then they were like, okay, we got to put that in there. And this one in particular, though, I will tell you, agents we want to get paid our commission. And so what happens is they're out showing a property, or we're out showing a property, and they want to buy it. And then they go, oh, well, what about this electrical issue? And the agent's like, oh, I don't think it's a big deal. I wouldn't worry about it. That's the idea behind where this came from, is agents saying stuff like, oh, that's not a big deal. And then they find out later on it is a big deal. And the buyer comes back and sues the company saying, your agent said it wasn't a big deal. So this is kind of our way of saying, we're not trained in that, so don't trust what we tell you, okay? Now, what will happen then is now, the reason I say to them, don't trust anything I tell you, is because then when we're out looking at a property, they're gonna say to you something along the lines of, so is this fence the property line? Or if there's not a fence, they're gonna go, so where's the property line? And at that point, I usually can say, remember, don't trust anything I'm about to tell you. And then they'll go, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. And then at that point, I usually will say, well, it looks like to me, this is where it is, but if you're really concerned, you should get a survey done. Okay? So for me, it's just kind of I always preface that with, don't trust anything I told you and tell you. And then when we're out there and they ask, do you think this electrical thing's a problem? Don't trust what I tell, remember, don't trust anything I say. This is what that meant. Don't trust me because I don't know. I'm not an electrician. But yeah, it's going to be fine. got no laugh from that. No,
Yeah,
Brian.
I'm not an electrician, but it looks fine. to me.
I'm not an electrician, but I wouldn't worry about it. All right. Dispute resolution. Totally kidding there, right?
You are covered technically if you say that, right? Like, hey, I'm not an electrician, but it's like, I mean, they could still dispute that. Like, hey, yeah, my realtor told me this, even though we're safe by the contract, they could still.
Oh, yeah,
argue
they
it,
would still argue that, no, well, he said it was fine.
but we were safe. But yeah, just to be ultra safe and not even deal with that whole situation. Say, I'm
Just be
not an
like,
electrician.
no, well, I don't know, but I have a good electrician you could call and ask him.
Yeah, and
like
I,
it.
usually that's what I say is just, look, I'm not an electrician, but
Home inspector.
that in my house that's looks the same way and I haven't worried about it, but if you're concerned, the answer is always, if it's something you're worried about, you should talk to a professional. Yeah. All right, section 8, in the event that we do end up in court, what this is saying is, oh, sorry, I skipped section 7. Section 7 is dispute resolution. 7 says that in the event there's a dispute, we will go to mediation first. Okay, so we're just agreeing we will do mediation first. Section 8 says in the event that didn't work and we end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. Okay. Section 9 is where they are giving us authorization to disclose after the closing to the MLS, the purchase price. And why would we need that?
This has something to do with Utah being a non-disclosure
That's
state.
exactly what it is. Yep. Is because we're a non-disclosure state, without their permission, we couldn't put it even on the MLS what the closed price was. Okay, the other thing they're giving us permission or an authorization for in section 9 here is to contact them and talk about real estate, basically get around the do not call list, okay? Section 10, there either are or are not additional terms, in which case we would use the addendum. So typically you're gonna check are not on that. And then later on, you may end up adding an addendum, but typically to begin with, you're not.
What's the one that you've seen that's like
A time
Yes.
you would.
yeah.
Yes.
This is a common one.
So the most common would be, let's say, and this doesn't happen even still very often, but let's say that let's say you had an internet lead that you were working and you sat down with them and you asked them to sign the buyer broker and they said to you, that's fine, except for that our neighbor said they might sell their house to us. And if they decide to do that next week or, whatever, then I don't want to have to pay you a commission on it. I would say, okay, great. We'll check the R box on this. We'll do an addendum that says this agreement does not include the property located at whatever.
Okay.
So typically that's what it's going to be something like that. All right. Section 11 is equal housing opportunity. This one basically just says that we're going to follow all the fair housing laws. Now, here's remember I told you guys on the day 1 of this class, I think it was day 1 of it, or maybe, I don't know. At some point I said to you guys, might have been, actually it probably was Tuesday that I said this. There are certain things that the division, in order for me to give you the 12-hour new agent credit CE that the division requires, this is one of those times right here, okay, fair housing. There are people who go out and do testing that are going to test you to see if you will violate fair housing laws. So just know that you need to treat everybody the same, that you can't discriminate against anybody or a property or an area. You can't say stuff about this is a bad area, don't live in this area. You can't tell somebody this would be a great family home. You can't, in your advertising, that type of stuff. You got to be careful of all those fair housing type of stuff. So what this section is saying is that we're going to follow all the fair housing laws here, okay? And I used to have a really cheesy video that I would show you guys, but it's gotten so old that I'm like, I'm not even showing it.
It's like the fresh corn one,
Oh, I don't know what that.
like an acronym for like all the whatever.
Oh, for the fiduciary duties. No, this one, yeah, it was just so cheesy. And it's just the way the actors were not good. And some of the stuff that they would say on there, you were like, nobody would ever say that. But
It's cheesy in the 90s, so now it's
Yes.
like quadruple.
right,
cheesy.
which is why I was like, yeah, seriously, it probably was filmed in the 90s. And I was like, yeah, I'm done. But it was one that the NAR made. So it satisfied kind of the fair housing stuff. All right, section 12, electronic transmissions and counterparts. This one is just where we're agreeing that we can do electronic signatures and counterparts we don't really end up using counterparts anymore, but I'll still explain to you what it is, just because it's possible, I guess you came across it, but. Used to be when we would fax stuff to get signatures, that what would happen is like you would write an offer and you'd fax one to the husband and one to the wife at their jobs. They would sign it and then fax them back. So a counterpart would be, I took the same document, sent it to two different people. He signed this one, she signed that one, and I got them back. So I don't have their signatures on the exact same piece of paper, but it is the same document. Does that make sense? So that's what would make counterparts. And so we're agreeing we could do that. So if for some reason, whatever it was, somebody signed in dot loop, but the other person was here at the office or whatever, you could have printed out before the person signed on dot loop and had one person sign in person on the document and then the other one signed on dot loop. That would be counterparts too. Okay. So we're just agreeing that that's all okay. Section 13 is the due on sale clause. There's only really 2 times that you need to worry about explaining this section to a buyer. What would they be?
Still have a mortgage on their
Who?
home. If the buyer. Yeah, if the buyer, the home they live in right now has a mortgage on it. Right? Because once they buy, there's a due on sale clause on.
Possibly. That's a good point. I haven't thought about that. That's not what I was thinking. But essentially, it's if they're going to buy a home doing seller finance, they need to be aware of this due on sale clause or a lease option. If they're purchasing the home they're going to purchase, either they're doing it as a seller finance, in which case, actually, though, it goes to what you're saying. Even a seller finance wouldn't matter if there was not a mortgage on the property, the sellers. But if the seller is going to keep a mortgage in place, that's probably the best way of saying it, because even on a lease option, they still are. If the,
Subject to.
yeah, if they're doing it subject to, yep, then the due on sale clause matters. So here's what, when I get to this section, I always just tell the buyers, look, if you're going to end up looking at doing a seller finance or a lease option, I need to explain this section to you, but if you're not, then you don't. But so in the event you're going to explain it to them, they run the risk that if they bought it as seller finance and the seller kept their existing mortgage in place, they do run the risk that that mortgage company calls that note due and payable to the seller, in which case, if the buyer couldn't satisfy that, it could be foreclosed on, they would lose the house. So that's kind of the idea of that.
Back to the seller who's financing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like I hear from all the lending people is just stay away from seller finance.
Yeah.
Be safe. So, but yeah, can you, touch on that a little bit more? So how it works is the buyer's coming to the seller isn't necessarily charging them the whole loan. They're just gonna set up payments, but they do need the money. So like, how is the mortgage people involved?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so here's what typically happens is there is a company out there, and I'm sure there's more than this company, but the most common one that agents use is called escrow specialists.
Okay.
Where if you're going to do a seller finance, which here's the thing, I do foresee down the road, we're going to start doing a lot of these, I believe.
Okay.
So I think it probably is good to start talking about it. But here's why. As interest rates start to creep up, you're going to have all these people who have bought homes over the last few years that have interest rates that are under 3%. Well, when it's time to go buy now, and if interest rates are at 5%, that's going to be a pretty attractive way to do it, to say, I'll come in and take over your mortgage at 2.5%, and then I'll go get a second mortgage at the 5%, but at a much lower balance, hopefully. So anyway, so yeah. So what's going to happen then typically, if I were representing a buyer that was going to do this, I want to make sure that between us and the seller, we're using escrow specialists or some type of a company like that, where what happens is the buyer is going to make their payment to escrow specialists. Escrow specialist then is going to take that money, they're going to pay the seller's mortgage payment for them, and then whatever amount is remaining after that will go to the seller, if there's anything left over. Does that make sense? And the reason you want to do that is if I'm the buyer, if let's say you're the buyer and I was the seller and I was going to do a seller finance, and you sent me the money for the payment, whatever it's gonna be, let's say it's 2,000, but I owe $1,000 a month for my mortgage payment. How are you gonna know if you give me the $2,000, I might just pocket the $2,000 and never pay the $1,000 to my mortgage because I need the money. In which case, you're gonna get foreclosed, I'm gonna get foreclosed on, which you're gonna lose your house. So that's why you use this third party as a way of having this third party be the ones to make the payment on behalf of the seller. That way the buyer knows the payment's getting still made.
And there's a class on seller finance, I don't think it, because that's, I
Okay.
mean, still, I've got a lot of like training on it, but it's still
Okay.
like.
In fact, I'll get one
Everything's not
scheduled.
included.
I'll get a CE class scheduled that we could do that, because that's a good idea.
Like
But
really in depth in the different situations and like, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I mean, I have learned a lot about it, but it's still like all the pieces aren't really there for me, it's not fully connecting.
Sure.
So.
okay, yeah. So I do think down the road, we're gonna start to see them. So we'll see what happens, but I might be wrong. All right, section 14 says this is the entire agreement. Anything that we've talked about is agreed to in writing, but it also says, and I want to make sure you see this, that the entire agreement includes this buyer broker, the buyer due diligence checklist, wire fraud alert disclosure, and any other addenda contained in the agreement. So that's what is contained. So are the wire fraud becomes part of this? So I guess actually to answer your question that you did at the start, technically, they haven't signed it an entire, you don't have an entire agreement until they have signed the buyer due diligence checklist, the wire fraud alert, and then any other addenda.
Jeez. Should you bring all these and have them sign, or, as I said, typically what I do is I'll bring the EDB, just like the 2-page.
Yeah.
And then everything's dot looped over to them, and they're like, hey, from the transaction coordinator, it says, hey, to get things rolling, we have to get these signed, and that's it. But is there a benefit to just getting all of it signed?
Let me
upfront?
read this real quick here. Let's see. Okay, the exclusive buyer broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist, wire fraud alert disclosure, and any other addenda contain the entire agreement between the parties relating to the subject matter of the exclusive buyer broker agreement. I guess the only thing I'm wondering now, as I'm reading through this, is if there was a problem that they wanted out and you had not had them sign that, could an attorney use that as a way of saying, you didn't have an entire agreement, so. we don't
Okay, so
even
what
have
is
to-
your thoughts? If just the EDB signed, would they have something?
That's
to
what
do?
this,
hold on
okay,
to?
this exclusive buyer broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist or wire fraud alert and any additional contains the entire agreement between the parties related to the subject matter. I would say yes, based on the fact that it says the entire agreement between the parties relating to the subject matter of this exclusive buyer broker agreement. Yeah,
Better
so,
question, what if you just have the EDB signed, what do you technically have authorization to do then?
well, I would say, based on this, you haven't completed the
Nothing
whole
at all
thing.
then. Okay,
I don't know. I'm not an attorney though. This is the
Yeah.
don't trust anything I tell you section.
that's great.
But I am gonna go talk to Sam Bell, who is our attorney that on that, because that actually, I'm actually thinking of it more, that this is my devious mind thinking, but I'm actually thinking of it more from the standpoint of if you get somebody that says, hey, well, I've already signed it, but I don't like my agent. Could we get a copy of it and say, well, did you sign these other forms too? And if they didn't,
They don't have.
then
Yeah.
well, yeah, you don't technically have an agreement then. So I don't know, I'll have to follow up on
Yeah, let me know.
that. I will.
I'm an attorney, but I didn't hear that question.
Did you say you are an attorney?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Then
She can answer it for us.
yeah, I'm kind of lost as to what specific question was.
So on section 14.
Yeah,
Where it says, this exclusive buyer broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist form, wire fraud alert disclosure, and any other additional addenda contains the entire agreement between the parties relating to the subject matter of this exclusive buyer broker agreement. So what he's saying is, if you didn't have them sign the due diligence or the wire fraud alert, do you have a valid, is this enforceable? Could somebody use that as a way to get out of the contract?
I don't think so. I think it includes it. If it's not there, then they haven't agreed to it, so that they wouldn't It wouldn't alter the agreement.
It wouldn't change the buyer.
I don't think so,
Okay.
no.
See, I'm not an attorney.
My question would be though, like say you have.
After you tell me you're an attorney, you can't ask me any question now. I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Okay, go ahead.
Well, in the beginning, it says that this agreement pertains to properties that you've located. But essentially, if you put someone in your contact list and provide them with those auto alerts for properties, if a property is in there that you essentially located, if it's not defined, this is enforceable for really any property contained in anything on the MLS really that you've sent them. And if you have them sign it before the actual offer is made, it really kind of can implicate anything, which is good for us.
Yeah.
But then when you're pursuing mediation or other things, you're kind of taking away your time from other buyers, other
Right.
properties, potential, and harping on essentially going after the monies for a property, which could be more costly in the end.
Yeah, which is why it doesn't happen very often.
Okay, and then your reputation is also kind of one as being not petty if there's, substantial money involved, but something that would be, not something that you would be recommended to other people for. So, is that why you think people err on the side of not having it signed until the offer here? Or, because
So, yeah, well, the main reason I think most people don't is they're just afraid that they're gonna chase the buyer away by asking them to be committed to them. And I would also say the fact that very rare that it's enforced, that anybody does take it to court. And so because of that, I think a lot of people are just like, well, why do I even get it signed then? Because it doesn't really worth anything. So, and to some extent, I would agree that in a lot of ways, it does just keep honest people honest is all it really does. Because I have sat in on panels at the board where we've done arbitrations basically over the commission. And we have said to people, hey, yes, you've got this, you could go take them to court and still try to collect it. But as far as us doing a procuring cause, we're giving the commission to the other person. And every single time I've been on one of those, the agent, I'm not gonna go take them to court, for exactly what you were saying. It's like, it's not really worth the effort and energy you're gonna put into it. And I also would say, I think a lot of times agents mess up enough along the way that if they did go to court, they run more of the risk. The attorney or the judge is gonna go, well, you didn't do nothing, you really didn't do your fiduciary duties, so why should they pay you,
Yeah.
kind of thing. I don't know.
Well, yeah, with the section 14 though, I think if you don't include something, it's just the entire agreement is the entire agreement with the understanding that that's not included.
But this would
It's
still
not
be
agreed
enforced.
to. Yeah. I
Okay,
think
good.
so.
Well, there's your answer.
I think, but
I'll trust you.
I need the
All right, so then next piece, so they're going, oops, this hasn't caught up to me yet. There we go. So they're going to sign, you're going to sign, so you, just so you know, anywhere that it says signature of authorized buyer's agent, if it says agent, you're authorized to sign it. There are some addendums though, that will say that it has to be signed by the principal broker, in which case you need to get it signed by the principal broker. But if it says authorized agent, you are all authorized, okay?
Fun fact, a referral addendum needs the broker. So
Yeah.
just fine.
So the other thing I want to point out is notice the red line here that says, do they have a real estate need outside of our market area? That's just there to remind you to ask them, do they have one? So yes or no. If they do, great, send them, refer them. Okay. All right, then they're going to initial and date. All right. It only took us an hour and 10 minutes to get through the first 3 pages. So we'll be here for hours. No, just kidding. We'll pick up the pace now. All right, so the next one is the buyer due diligence. Buyer due diligence is, again, for me, typically when I get to section 9 where I said, don't trust anything I tell you, what I do when I get to that section is I usually at that point will bring up the buyer due diligence. So Aiden, this is where for me, I usually still have them do it, but others wait and do it later when you do an offer, and that's fine too. But for me, when I get there, I just do this. But even if I did, if you had them sign it later on, I usually, when I bring this up, I remind them, remember when I said, don't trust anything I tell you? It is because of this notice from the company that I'm trained in the marketing of real estate. And how I explain this form to them is I just say, these are some ideas of things that some people consider before purchasing a home. You may want to consider talking to a professional in these areas if you're concerned about it. And then from there, I just go through and let them see, as far as building or zoning codes, like I don't go through and read all this to them, but I just tell them they can scan through it. But for you guys, as far as can they rent the property, hazardous waste, radon, gas, surveying, staking, home warranties, floods, homeowners insurance, title insurance, physical conditions, square footage, utility service, water, all these things. I just, these are all areas that some people may want to consider. Now that's way slow compared to how I spun that up there, but, and then you have them sign it. So think of it this way. Here's how I like to explain it when I'm training on this buyer due diligence form. On the seller side of things, you're fine. This, I don't think it can pick you up to clear up. On the seller side of things, I always say the seller's property condition disclosures are their get out of jail free card. For you, this buyer due diligence checklist is your get out of jail free card, or as close to it as we have. Because basically this is the way of, if you have explained to them, that there are professionals that you can talk to, and it's not you, you're trained in the marketing of real estate. This is your proof that we have told them that. So if you stop and think about it, you've got section 9 that says professional advice and we're trained in the marketing of real estate. You've got this whole form that says the same thing, that if they have questions on any of those, they should talk to a professional. Then the next form we have is this receipt and acknowledgement of buyer due diligence form. This one is a Century 21 Everest form. You can see it's got the logo, the old one, so I need to update that form too. But you can see on there, this one is a receipt and acknowledgement of the due diligence. So this one's just another layer of protection for you, because here's the thing. Unfortunately, we do so much of stuff through .loop or a DocuSign where most agents are probably not taking time to explain this due diligence form. And they also are probably just including it. The person's going through clicking initials and signatures. It hasn't been explained, whatever. The thing that I like about this one is this just gives us another layer of protection for us as the company, just saying that they're initialing here that they have reviewed the buyer due diligence checklist. And the thing that I like about this one is they're going to have to initial, but in about the amount of time it would take you to click and initial that, you could pretty much read that, I hereby understand and acknowledge of my rights to have a home inspection performed by a professional home inspector. Like, I like that this one is just short and sweet, so that again, in the event somebody does try to sue you over, hey, you didn't tell me I could have a home inspection, which I actually just had a conversation with a buyer for one of our agents in our company. And they were asking me, should I do a home inspection or should I not? And the reasoning they said that is because they're like, the seller just rehabbed the home totally. And my answer was, here's the thing. It's totally your decision if you want to do that or not. But I own currently a home in Mississippi that I will gladly give to any one of you guys if you want it. You can just take over the payments. So here, let's do a seller finance deal right now, Aiden. Like, for real, you can just have it. You just take over the payments. I'll seller finance it for you and you can have the house. But here's my point. If I would have done, I didn't do it. I was an agent when I bought the house. I was so stupid that it was in Mississippi. I didn't even ever fly out there to see it. Like, I still am like, what was I thinking? But the numbers made sense. I bought the house. And for now 10 plus years, I have just been like, I wish I didn't own that house. So anytime somebody asks me, should I do a home inspection? I guarantee you if I'd have done a home inspection, I would not have bought the house. So when you ask me, should I do a home inspection? It's up to you, but I wish I would have, and I didn't. So.
That's what it's like, you trust that dude? You trust this total stranger? Tell me yes or no. It's
Right,
like,
yeah, that's
sure,
probably,
we
that
don't
would
need
have
it.
been a good way to say it. Do you trust the guy that, would you let him take your kid for the weekend? All right. So same thing with home warranty, mold, radon, we're gonna have them initial each one of these. And that's just an extra layer of protection to us. So now we would have section 9 that says we're not we're trained in the marketing of real estate and that we're not professionals in the areas. We got our buyer due diligence form that they will have signed. And we'll have this where they've initialed each of these individual items that we are telling them that they have the right to do that, okay? You're gonna put the address of the property here. So typically so here's how I usually work it, going back to your question again. I usually get this buyer due diligence signed at the time that I get the buyer broker signed, but I don't usually have them initial and sign this one until we've identified the property. And so that, what I mean by that is if I wrote 5 different offers for this buyer, I'm gonna have them do this one 5 different times because we're putting the property address on. I'm not sure that all agents do that, but that's how I do it.
It's the safest way.
Yeah, for me, well, because again, if they tried to come back and sue me over something, if you told me blah, if I had them sign it on, we'd written 3 offers, like I would have 3 times that I'd be like, okay, we got section 9, you got the buyer due diligence, and then you initialed this 3 times, like. Didn't sink in. Yeah. go
I
ahead.
think you mentioned earlier, and you may have referenced it, but having these documents signed by like a DocuSign or electronically. The problem that I've encountered with that, not in the real estate context, but just generally, is that then the individual can't change or alter or not agree to anything. The program doesn't allow you to move on without the next page, so I would think that in the future that would be problematic. But so if I would say if you do see them in person, to have them do it, you know, by pen, the old fashioned way, because at least that way they're not arguing, well, I had to do it.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's unfortunate, but if it's an agreement, then they can't disagree with it, so.
Because it's like, oh, they just wouldn't sign anything then, like, because
Perhaps,
you don't
yeah.
have a fully executed contract, like everything's like filled out, right?
Yeah.
So it would have to be just kind of all or nothing. Like,
Right, exactly.
Are they allowed to alter the agreement? They're not allowed to, are they?
It's up to you.
Well, so let's back up. So this is not the preferred way of doing it. But remember before I said, when we were talking about the brokerage fee here, and we now have blank lines, and it used to be, well, sorry, I forgot that it's that slow to catch up. That it used to be that, and not so much on this one, but on our listing agreement, it was printed in there 7%. And what typically agents would do is when they would go meet with the seller, they would then cross out the 7, write 6, and have the seller initial next to it. So it's the better method is to use an addendum, was what we would always do, but agents would always still cross it out. So, which is kind of what you're referring to, right? So. Okay, so now next is the confirmation of earnest money receipt. Let me get a catch up. Okay. So the confirmation of earnest money receipt is going to be filled out once you receive the earnest money. And you're going to put the buyer's name, your name as the buyer's agent, the brokerage is Century 21 Everest, who the seller is, who the seller's agent is, the seller's brokerage, the property address, and then you're confirming the receipt of the earnest money. And you're going to just put the date in here of the offer reference date of the REPC in here, and the date that you received the earnest money, and then how you got the earnest money, which I don't know why. No, I do know why. This is not our form, that's why. We do, so the first option here is wire, which we do not, as a company, we are not going to accept wires for earnest money. Now, there may be exceptions to that, you know, but it would have to be, as a general rule, we don't want to accept the wire. And the reason for that being is going to be, once we get to this wire fraud alert, is we just don't want to take the risk of us wiring the money to the wrong place or whatever. So pretty rare we're going to do that. So usually you're either going to have them bring in a personal check or a cashier's check. Let me just tell you though, if in the event they bring in a personal check for the earnest money and we deposit it, and then your client wants to cancel, we will not refund the earnest money back until, I think it's 10 days after it is deposited, is how long before we will refund the earnest money. And the reason for that is, for a while, what was happening is people would go out and write offers and put down, $5,000 earnest money. And then the next day, after it had been deposited, they would go back to the companies and say, yeah, never mind, I want to cancel that transaction, just refund my earnest money. And companies would then refund the earnest money, and then you'd find out later on, the check that the initial earnest money came from was a stolen or whatever, and then the company was out the money. So now, as a result of that, pretty much every brokerage out there, if it's a personal check and they cancel it, they will not be given the earnest money back for 10 days, long enough that we can know if the check cleared or not. All right, so they're gonna sign that. Next one is limited agency consent. So you're only gonna use this form if Century 21 Everest is the listing side of the transaction and the buying side. So if we are both sides, whether it's your listing or another agent within the company, then you need to use limited agency. If it is not Century 21 Everest, which there's a couple of other Century 21 franchises out there that are not Everest. If it's not a Century 21 Everest, you will not need limited agency. But if the listing, if you're on the buyer side and the listing side is Century 21 Everest as well, whether it's your listing or somebody else within the company, you'll need to use this form. So you'll fill it out with the name of the buyer, name of the seller, agent representing the buyer, agent representing the seller, the name of the brokerage, and the property address. And then they'll initial, and you're gonna either check the box that it's one agent or there's two agents. So one agent's if you're the listing agent and the buyer's agent. If it's another agent within the company, you're gonna check this box here, okay?
Or just write my name and on everyone.
Right. Okay, so, I have a friend that is a real estate attorney as well. And he would always say to me, I don't know how you guys do this limited agency thing. And I would say, what do you mean? And he's like, that would be like me going to court and I'm gonna represent both sides in court. Like, it's not possible. And I was like, well, I don't know, we do it all the time. And I like the paycheck too, so. Anyway, all right, so the buyer's gonna sign, seller's gonna sign, and then you're authorized. So again, if this was two agents within the company, only one of you needs to sign on behalf of the company, okay? And then the wire fraud alert disclosure, so you're gonna have them fill this out as well and sign it. Now, here's the point on this is I always wanna stop and explain to them, before wiring any money, make sure you know where it's going to. We had an agent who no longer with our company, and they weren't at the time that this happened, but right before this happened, they were with our company. That she was an agent with our company, but she would also buy properties to rehab and sell. And so she had left the company, found a property that was actually listed by one of our agents that she wanted to purchase and then rehab and sell it. Well, she got one of these notice emails saying the wire instructions have changed. She wired $150,000 to the wrong account. Now, luckily, and I don't know how they did this, but luckily, right after it happened, the title company caught it and was able to call the bank and get it stopped before the bank could actually send it on. So having worked at a bank, although it's been a long time now, but the wires do sit at the bank for a short time till somebody would process them. And luckily they were able to catch it before that happened. So she didn't lose their $150,000. But this is a scenario where when I'm having the client sign this on the buyer side, I tell them, once you get the wire instructions, double, triple, quadruple check with the title company. Don't call the phone number on any emails you get. Make sure that you talk to me to get the phone number for the title company, and then you call them to make like double, triple check before you wire, because if once that wire's gone, it's gone. So anyway, just I explain that to them and have them sign it. The affiliated business arrangement disclosure, you're going to put in there the buyer's name, the property address, the date. And the purpose of this form is to let them know, so let me point out a few things here, that they are not required to use the listed providers as part of their settlement services, that there are frequently other settlement service providers available with similar services, and that they're free to shop around. But because Inspiro Financial and North Star Title are sister companies to Everest, we have to disclose that we're affiliated. Okay, that they don't have to use them, but we at least have to disclose that we're affiliated with it. Okay, and then they sign it. And then the last form here, actually, no, I think we have one more out, is the lead-based paint. and I have not asked many questions for a while, so I gotta wake you guys up. What year, let me rephrase that. If I'm writing an offer on a property built in 1978, do I need this form? Okay, I saw a head shake no, and I heard a yes. Okay, what do the rest of you think? Okay,
You said
so we have 2 yeses.
1979?
No,
and
it
an
says
I don't know.
prior to.
What's that?
No, it says prior to 1978.
Good catch. That's exactly right. So it's only for homes built prior to 1978. So if it was built in 78, we don't need it. Okay. But prior to 78, we do. Now, would it hurt if you put it in? No. I mean, and I used to do a lot of foreclosure homes, and banks will include it on every property, even if it was built last year, they would still do a lead-based paint. So it's not going to hurt, but you don't need it unless it was built prior to 78. So you're going to put in the address of the property. The buyer is going to, or excuse me, we're doing the buyer. So I'm going to skip the seller. Hopefully Jason talked about the seller last week. The buyer one, you're going to initial that they've received any copies of the information in section 2A and 2B. They're initialing that they've received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. So make sure you give them that pamphlet. They're going to initial that they have read the warning section up here in section 1. And then they're also going to initial either 3D, that they're on 3D, they're initialing one or the other. Either that they are going to take a 10-day opportunity to test for lead-based paint, in which case you also need to include the lead-based paint addendum, or that they are waiving their opportunity for lead-based paint. Okay. So they are initialing one or the other. Occasionally we will see agents that just have them, they drop initials in here for dot loop and they have them initial everything. So they'll initial this and this. If that happens, then as a company, we're going to say you also need to include then this lead-based paint addendum because they've initialed this. Got it? Section 4 is initialed by the seller's agent that they've informed the seller of their obligation to disclose, and then everybody gets to sign. Buyers, sellers, and both agents. Okay. All right, the last form here is the commission report. This one's your friend. This one means you're getting paid money. Okay, so you're going to fill this out. Oops. Messing up my plug-in here. Okay, so you're going to fill this out once it's time to get paid. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to put in the address of the property here, who the buyer is, who the seller is, who the title company is. And then typically when you're filling this one out, this one is a, it's not on .loop. So you won't find this form on .loop because it's an Excel form. So you'll have to get it, a copy of it, and you can get it just, if you called the front desk and just had them send you a copy, you can get it, the commission report. But this is this box right here that I'm hovering over is a drop-down box. So on Excel, you would click on it and it would open up the box to where you could see that you're either doing residential buying, residential selling, commercial buying, or commercial selling. So you just select what it is. Then you're going to put in the purchase price, what the price was. Is the commission going to be based off gross or net, which it says on the MLS, so you'll know if it's gross or net by looking at the MLS. What is the commission that you're collecting? So 3 or 2 or 2.5 or whatever, 3.5 or 4. Do you owe a commission to an outside referral company? If so, you'll click the drop-down box. If not, leave it as none. Commission advance company used. Typically, you're going to just do no on that, but that is a drop-down box. The Century 21 admin fee collected. So remember we did on page 1 of the buyer broker, we had the section where we're going to put in how much of a admin fee. And so this would be where you're putting it in. So typically, like I said, your independent contractor agreement, you have agreed to collect a minimum of $295. So minimum, you should be collecting $295. But if you didn't, for some reason, if you waived it, then you're just going to put 0 in here. Okay. If you did a $495 or a $595 or a $695, then you're going to put whatever it was that you collected. Okay. Earnest money that's held by Everest. So if we're holding the earnest money, you're going to put down the amount of earnest money that we're holding. If it's not held by us, you just leave it blank or leave it at 0. Agent credits given at title. which again, I usually say, don't do that. Don't give away money at closing, but occasionally somebody might give away a couple $100 or something. If you did, put that in. That's gonna then calculate how much the title check should be. So whatever check we get from the title company, the amount right here should match what the check actually we got, okay? So then down here is gonna be the commission to the agent. How is the commission gonna be split? If it's just you, single agent, you just leave it at single agent. If you're part of a team, you're gonna click this box and select team. And then it's gonna open up another box just like this over here in this section, okay? And you're gonna put your name in right here. If you're part of a team, actually, if you're part of a team, you're most likely not filling this out, although you still might be. So anyway, if you are part of a team, you'd fill out the box over here for the team leader. The admin fee collected. So this is where I was saying, we're just gonna assume you collected a minimum of the $295. So if you didn't, if you had put 0 up here, it's now gonna deduct $295 from your commission. So just so you know, if you don't collect it, this is where it gets deducted. If you did, then it balances it out. So now you'll see here that it has the agent base of being 9,000 from the 9,295. From this, you're gonna put in what split you're on. So I used the example earlier in the class about if you were on a 70% split. Well, if you're on a 70% split, you're gonna put 30 in here because that's how much is going to Everest, okay? So it's gonna deduct Everest's portion of the commission right here. The franchise fee, which is 6% of the total commission, is gonna go to Century 21 National. And then if you were using a TC, or sorry, excuse me, if you had not collected it up here, if that was 0, this would then have taken out the $295 here from you, okay? And then if you want to donate to our foundation, so Century 21 Everest has a foundation that we would give away money to. If you want to participate in that, you can put in the amount you want to here. The default is $21. It's the recommended, but you can change it to whatever you want, including 0. If you're using a transaction coordinator, the fee goes here, but here's what I'll tell you. If you're using a transaction coordinator, you're not filling this form out. So you don't have to worry about it. So you'll probably be if you're filling this out and you're using a transaction coordinator, you're wasting your money. Let them fill it out. But if you were, that's where the amount is, and then what their name is goes there. This will then calculate, here's the net amount of your check. And you can either do it direct deposit, yes or no, which is a drop down box here, okay? So once you have filled all that out, oops, I went too far. Once you've filled this out in Excel, you're then gonna do a print to PDF or print it and scan it because you have to upload it to Dotloop as a PDF, so. All right, what questions? We're done, unless you have questions. Will you flip the lights back on? No questions? All right. Well, thanks for being here. So then Tuesday is going to be the REPC workshop class, where basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through the real estate purchase contract. So Rob did it the first day of class and went through it in detail. This one's more of a workshop. So what we'll do actually on Tuesday is I'm going to give to you a purchase contract that's filled out, that's got a whole bunch of mistakes. You guys are going to go through and we'll find the mistakes, and then we'll go through and talk about all the mistakes and stuff that people have made in filling it out. And but it's also Summit, so we will be done probably by, I'm gonna have to make sure we're done by 11:15 so that we can all get to Summit before it starts. So Tuesdays will be a little bit shorter of a class. And then Thursday for you guys that are on Zoom, and I know some of you are in St. George, so you may not be able to do this, but if you are in a reasonable area that you could drive here to the office next Thursday, come be in person. Like I'm highly, in fact, I would encourage you from St. George to drive and be here. Maybe not, but what we're gonna do next Thursday, we're gonna play a game. Is the last part of the 12-hour new agent class. We're gonna play a game. And it actually is fun if people are here. If you're on Zoom, it's not fun. So be as many as you can, be here. If you're in St. George, this is the only excuse. If you're not in St. George, be here. Sound good? Okay, see you all on next Tuesday then.
So I missed the first class, first hour, I think, because I thought I had the wrong time. Are these online?
So they are, but in order for me to give you the CE credit,
Yeah,
you have to be live for 90%. But I think, you said you missed the first hour?
I think so.